The NFL playoffs are here, and with your fantasy football season over, the best way to use your sports knowledge to win cash is by betting at MyBookie, the #1 rated online sportsbook. They have odds on all kinds of sports, live betting, and something that I'm really excited about, an all-new prop builder. That's right, you can create your own bet slips and bet how you want. So, say you're hanging out with your friends and want to make a bet on any aspect of the playoff games. How much yardage Kamara will have? Will Foles throw more than one interception? You can bet it at MyBookie and put your money where your mouth is. Even better, with their world-class mobile site, you can bet anytime, anywhere. Join now and MyBookie will match your deposit with a 50% bonus. Just use the promo code OFFTHECHARTS, all lowercase, one word, when making your account. Visit mybookie.ag today and bet on the internet's favorite sportsbook, where you play, you win, and you get paid. Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, Mel Kiper's mock draft came out this morning, and Josh Allen is our new #1 pick. What is your reaction to that?
It's one of the most insane things I've ever heard. I think I asked you before we started recording if it was the most insane thing that you have ever heard. And you pointed out that there are a lot of insane things going on in the world right now. I mean, just look at politics. But I feel like I have to mention how crazy it is. The idea that Josh Allen would be the #1 pick. This is a guy who was 8th in completion rate and 10th in yards per pass. Not in all of college football. I mean, just in the Mountain West.
It's unbelievable. We're not oblivious to the fact he's 6'5", he can run, he's got arm strength all day. I mean, if you watch him in the bowl game, you can see the arm talent there, and you don't have to be a seasoned NFL scout to see it. But this is a guy that did not put a very good performance on film this year, regardless of who his teammates were. And for that to be the #1 overall pick, only in 2018.
Yeah, Chris Trapasso made this comparison that I have made as well, which is I think people think of Josh Allen that he's an athletic guy who can run around and plays in kind of a pro-style offense in a lower conference, thus equals Carson Wentz.
And the coaching staff similarities, of course.
Right. I don't think so. I think it's Jake Locker. He's Jake Locker with one important difference, which is that Locker really didn't care much about football, and there's no indication that Allen has the same problem. But otherwise, he's Jake Locker. He's not Carson Wentz. He has 56% completion rate. How do you take that with the #1 overall pick?
Yeah, it seems like a stretch to me. I think both of us are kind of thinking maybe this is a little bit of clickbait, putting Allen at the top of the draft in an early mock. Maybe it's some smoke screens coming from around the league, people that Mel Kiper's talking to that are trying to push up other guys than the guys that they're interested in. But whatever it is, he would be, I think, the least successful passer in his final season before coming out that we'd ever seen drafted #1 overall.
No, it would be amazing. And I mean, it's amazing when guys come out. I mean, top picks don't always work out, but this is one that wouldn't work out very well. But then, I mean, when you talk about top picks and whether they work out or not, you get to this weekend where we have a #3 overall pick who everyone thinks is terrible, and yet here he is high in the AFC Championship game, Mr. Blake Bortles.
Mr. Trent Dilfer, Blake Bortles?
Yeah, another high pick, right? Wasn't Trent Dilfer like 5th overall, I think?
Was he? I don't even remember that. It took him a while to get it going. Maybe, hey, you said it earlier in the year, maybe Blake Bortles is on the same trajectory. That's really all the Jaguars need, right?
The trajectory to averageness, but inconsistent. And I think, so I think the most important issue with this game is not any split or any stat or any matchup thing we can give. I think the most important issue with this game is the incredible inconsistency of the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Makes it very difficult to figure out who is actually showing up for this game. When the Football Outsider preview comes out on Friday, the week-to-week graphs are astonishing. On offense, the Jaguars had 5 different games that were below minus 25%. They also had 4 different games above 25%, including last week against Pittsburgh. The defense is even crazier. It literally just goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down every single week. They had a below average game last week. 3 of Jacksonville's last 6 games, their defense has been below average by DVOA. So it is impossible to know who is coming. We are going to go through stats and we're going to go through matchup stuff that represents the averages for the whole season. But in reality, we don't know who shows up to the Jaguars because there's so much inconsistency there.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is looking at just last week and how many points they gave up to the Pittsburgh Steelers, when now all of a sudden we're talking about, their defense. It's a great matchup against Tom Brady. They might really be the type of team that can beat him because of their ability to cover on the back end and rush with 4 guys. But we're also looking at a team that came off last week. They didn't really win the game on defense at all. So definitely fascinating there. Let's jump into some of those matchups. You want to start with when the Patriots have the ball?
Sure. Obviously, people talk about pressure, and pressure is hugely important. And we all talk about how Tom Coughlin ran those Giants teams that beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and now here he is as sort of the general manager or the team president or whatever his job is for the Jaguars. But Brady this year was actually the number 1 quarterback when under pressure.
Yeah, 98.5 quarterback rating when under duress. And as you pointed out to me earlier in the week, the Jaguars' pass rush slowed down as the season went on. They generated much more pressure over the first half of the season than the second half. But sure enough, they've rebounded in the playoffs. 22 hurries against Buffalo. That was their most all year. And 14 against Pittsburgh was their 5th most all year. So
it's interesting because the percentages wise, before their bye week, they were second in the NFL with a pressure rate of 37.5%. Since week 9, 33.3%. So the fact that they've rebounded against those 2 teams, the Buffalo offensive line is not a great one, but the Pittsburgh offensive line is a great one.
Right. And the Tom Brady, while he does lead the NFL in quarterback rating under duress, of course, his rating is lower under pressure than it is in normal situations. And certainly the Jaguars are going to be looking to get him into those sets.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things, of course, about the Steelers game is what we know the Jaguars defense for, other than the pass rush, is the incredible cornerbacks, especially the outside cornerbacks with the duo of Jalen Ramsey and AJ Bowie. And yet the touchdowns that Pittsburgh threw were primarily to their outside wide receivers. Bowie was basically in Antonio Brown's lap for the first touchdown and close to it on the second one. The coverage was good. It's just Antonio Brown is amazing.
Unbelievable plays. Great coverage and just better Antonio Brown being Antonio Brown. Bryant
as well, but during the season, if you look at DVOA against types of receivers, Jaguars were number 1 against number 1 receivers, 8th against 2s, and 11th against quote-unquote other receivers. But they were 20th against tight ends and 15th against running backs. So those are comparative weaknesses, and they're not good comparative weaknesses to have against the Patriots.
Yes, you bring up one point that I wanted to make about personnel groupings. So here we're charting what type of personnel you have on the field every play. Is it 11 personnel with 1 running back and 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, or whatnot? And the Jags, of course, have the best passer rating against in the NFL on all plays. 62 is their passer rating against on the course of the season, but against 21 personnel, that's 2 running backs, 1 tight end, their passer rating goes down to 13th in the NFL at 89. And against 12 personnel, the passer rating drops all the way to 27th. They give up a passer rating of 111. And we know the Patriots are going to do a lot of 21 and 12 personnel stuff. As we mentioned last week, they run those sets more than anybody else in the league. So taking that deeper look, as you were saying, the backs and tight ends, the Jaguars specifically struggle defending those players in these personnel groups. So if I have one expectation, it's that the Patriots come out targeting the backs and the tight ends with 2 wide receivers on the field. Jaguars 28th in the NFL with an 114 quarterback rating against. When running backs and tight ends are targeted in either of those personnel groups, they allow 72% completions and 9 yards per attempt. So you got to expect that Belichick has found this weakness and will exploit it. Heavy dose of 2 wide receiver sets, Rex Burkhead, James White, James Devlin, Dwayne Allen. Look for these guys to take an expanded role in the game.
Actually, here's the player this is throwing a real long shot bet. Jacob Hollister. That's the third tight end for the Patriots. The Jaguars gave up big gains this year to unheralded second tight ends. 79 yards on 2 catches by Tyler Kroft in week 9. 72 yards on 4 catches by Ricky Seals-Jones in week 12. Maybe this is the week that Jacob Hollister finally makes a huge play as the move tight end while they're paying all this attention to Gronk on the other side of the formation.
Jacob Hollister, the famous younger brother of Jonathan Abercrombie and Fitch, I believe.
That's right. He's got a brother, a twin brother who's on the practice squad named Cody, who's a wide receiver. And I believe they're going to be on that NFL players as performers special on CBS, and they do look like they walked out of an Abercrombie and Fitch catalog.
And that's perfect.
Now, you guys have tracked, obviously, coverage. Who do you think is covering with Gronk? There's been a lot of discussion here on the radio in Boston about whether they might assign Jalen Ramsey to Gronk. That seems really unlikely to me.
So I think that's the natural speculation. Jalen Ramsey is one of the best corners in the NFL, and he's taken on a lot of the bigger targets this year. But when we actually broke down the numbers, we found that Miles Jack and Telvin Smith, the two very speedy linebackers that the Jaguars have the most snaps defending tight ends in pass defense for the Jaguars this year. And while they gave up a high percentage of completions, they did not give up many yards. So the completion percentage around 90% when Jack or Smith are targeted against tight ends, but the yards per attempt is only hovering around 7. Actually, it wasn't Jalen Ramsey, and it was Aaron Colvin, who was the corner that guarded tight ends the most for Jacksonville. Obviously, they haven't played anybody of Gronk's caliber this year, but if they do end up putting a corner on Gronk, we might be surprised to see that it's Colvin and not Ramsey based on what the Jaguars have done throughout the season.
Right. Delaney Walker had a big game against them the first time they played Tennessee, and that's maybe the closest that they came to Gronk all year, not in size, but in, value to the passing game. I think the other question a lot of people are going to ask about this game is the whole Tom Brady against man coverage thing. We know that Tom Brady destroys cover 3 defenses like Pittsburgh, and they play a Seattle-style cover 3 in Jacksonville. But, of course, the Seattle-style cover 3 is not always cover 3. It's a lot of cover 3 and a lot of cover 1.
Right. So Jacksonville's doing a lot, just like Seattle a few years ago, they were really sitting in that cover 3 all the time and playing it with a lot of press looks on the outside, kind of making it a little bit more of a hybrid look. But this year, just as the Seahawks have done, the Jaguars have mixed in a lot of cover 1 into there also, just playing straight man with the press and keeping the linebackers matched up on the running backs as opposed to playing a zone over the short part of the field. And I think if we see these coverages, which we should expect to because Jacksonville plays each of them about 30% of the time, we could see different things depending on whether it's the cover 3 or the cover 1 look. Brady completing 73% of his passes for an 107 quarterback rating against cover 3. And then he's down at just 58.6% completions and a rating of 98 against cover 1. So if they sit back in a lot of that cover 3 and they have a lot of the zone matchups going, look for Brady to pick them apart. I would expect the Jaguars to come out instead and really press all over the field and play a lot of man. And then that Gronk matchup becomes the really interesting thing to zone in on when that happens.
Right. And the other thing, of course, is the running game because, Jacksonville, their run defense improved significantly in the second half of the season. Once they had Marcel Darius, the run defense DVOA went from 31st in the first half of the season to 13th in the second half of the season. But the Patriots running game is phenomenal. Patriots have the number 1 running offense in the league by DVOA in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and I'm looking out for the Pats to be in a lot of their zone scheme stuff as opposed to pulling and gap scheme stuff up front. When they run inside zone, outside zone, they're 7th in the NFL in terms of yards per attempt, and that's where the Jaguars really struggle. They give up 3.98 yards per attempt on zone runs, which is 26th in the NFL. So that could be a matchup there that the Patriots want to exploit. I wouldn't expect a lot of power type runs, especially with Deion Lewis in the game. But one thing to look out for also, the Patriots love to run the ball in the red zone. So when they get into that red area, I wouldn't expect the Patriots to make the same sort of mistake that the Bills made, trying to throw the ball too much down there. Patriots have 105 rushing attempts in the red zone. That's 17 more than the next highest team.
Jacksonville defense, 3rd in the league, red zone passing, 29th in the league, red zone running.
Seems like an easy decision there to me.
Yeah. Now, the other side of the ball here, I think, is the even more up in the air. Like, we know the Patriots offense is awesome, unless this Brady hand injury is really a thing, and I don't think it will be. We know that the Jaguars defense is pretty awesome.
Can I pause you there? The Brady hand injury, part of me thinks that it's actually the Brady's Achilles injury that he was getting extra treatment on, but you don't have to actually report what he's getting the treatment on, but you can go give him the treatment, keep him away from the media so you get that extra work. It wouldn't shock me if an injury was reported, but it wasn't exactly the injury that was bothering him.
Oh, golly. Are you saying injury reporting in the NFL may not be entirely on the up and up?
It's possible. It's possible. I wouldn't know from experience, but it's possible.
But it's the Jaguars offense, right? That's the question, right? Because we know the Patriots defense has been better in the second half of the season, but the Jaguars offense has been better in the, like, roll dice. And if it's an even number, then yeah, they've been better. And if it's an odd number, then, oh my God, they're terrible. And who knows what to expect. So what are your thoughts here about the Jacksonville Jaguars offense against the Patriots defense?
So yeah, in the craps game that is the Jaguars offense, what it comes down to is, I think, their offensive line. And they've actually had the second most blown blocks allowed this year. That's on run plays and on pass plays. Their numbers split out on both types of plays. They've struggled a bunch. I think part of that is that their offense has had to deal with being in some tough situations. They're winning games with their defense, really, and just being counted on to do really predictable things on offense and kind of operate out of difficult situations. But still, those blown blocks, that means that you're being individually beaten by the guy in front of you. These aren't scheme missed blocks. This is physically being beaten by the guy in front of you. And show me a good offensive line and I'll show you a good offense. They're going to need that offensive line to step up if they want to have a chance in this game.
Yeah, and of course, a big part of this is going to be the red zone issue with the Patriots. There's never been another team like this. I know that the Patriots are known for defenses stiffening in the red zone, but the drive stats this year are there's never been another team like this, including any Patriots team from the last 20 years. The Patriots were dead last in the league in yards allowed per drive and somehow 6th in points per drive, despite the fact that they were below average in takeaways. And even if you only look since week 5, they're 26th in yards allowed per drive and 4th in points per drive. It's truly remarkable how often the Patriots stopped opponents in the red zone. Now, some of that was they allowed fewer points because field goal kickers missed in a sort of absurd extent with the Patriots. And you can't count on that happening with Josh Lambo. The Jaguars special teams, their field goal kicking got much better when Josh Lambo replaced Jason Myers. But their ability to stop teams in the red zone and force field goal attempts rather than touchdowns, we've never really seen anything like it in 20 years.
Yeah, and honestly, from my perspective, there's not a lot of explanation for that, I think. Really, if it was offensively and you said they've got a great quarterback, they've got a great running game, you can find reasons why you'd have extra success in the red area. But to be so stingy in the red area, with kind of a mediocre defense overall.
It can't be that they practice it more or that Belichick puts more emphasis on it, because why would Belichick have not practiced it more and put more emphasis on it in past years? And yet there's never been a split that comes even close to this, even for the Patriots.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff right there. One thing I'm looking at, again, just like we said, where we can expect the Patriots to come with a lot of zone scheme running as opposed to where they're pulling a lot of offensive linemen. Same thing for the Jaguars. The Jaguars are especially good at running on zone plays. They're second in the league on zone runs. And then the Patriots, in terms of defense, are all the way down at 25th in terms of defending zone runs, in terms of yards per carry. So just like we said, we could see the Patriots kind of with this vanilla offense, kind of mano-a-mano type scheme. We could see the same thing when the Jaguars have the ball. And I think a big part of this game comes down to whether or not they can have that success with Leonard Fournette. And hopefully he's healthy after his ankle and his car accident. But if he can have that success, and especially on those simple zone runs that set up the play action, I think that's a huge deal. And that's really, I think, the only way that we're going to see good Blake Bortles this week.
Right. And the play action was phenomenal in the last few weeks of the season, week 12 through 17, after being mediocre in play action earlier in the year. Suddenly, 82% completion rate, 17 yards per completion on play action passes over the last 6 games of the regular season for the Jaguars, which are just, I mean, really good numbers. And we know play action is going to be better than other pass plays, but those are phenomenal.
Yeah, it's interesting that the play action wasn't really helping them so much. You know, they were a middle to bottom team for the first 11 weeks of the season. Well, you still get the value of play action. Everybody's still worried about Leonard Fournette. But when they hit week 12, something clicked, and it seems like they've really become much more effective with that play action game.
One other thing that I will point out, I went and I looked at the passes by direction. So for those people who don't know, in the play-by-play, the official NFL play-by-play, they split passes into left, middle, and right, and then short and deep. Deep is anything that's 16 yards downfield or more. Now, it's not a shock if I tell you that in every single one of those directions, the Patriots have improved significantly since week 5. But there's one exception. They have improved significantly in each of those 6 directions except against short middle passes. The Patriots were 29th in DVOA against short middle passes in the first 4 weeks of the season and 29th in DVOA against short middle passes in weeks 5 through 17. So the Patriots have been stronger against tight ends. That's like the strongest position that they've been against in the receiving game. But I would be interested in seeing whether the Jaguars run a lot of crossing routes with wide receivers to try to take advantage of the Patriots not being able to keep up with those kind of man beater routes in the center of the field like that, because that is where the Patriots defense has had trouble. And by the way, the highest rank out of those 6 for the Jacksonville offense was short middle, where they ranked 14th.
Wow, interesting. So definitely keep an eye on the short middle of the field. And like you said, those man beater concepts, running the crossing patterns and option routes over that part of the field. Those are also higher percentage throws. So for a guy with all the arm talent of Blake Bortles, maybe throws that he can actually make there.
Yeah. Onward to the Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles, which, as Scott Kasbar has pointed out to me, is the first conference championship game between 2 teams that missed the playoffs the previous year since we saw the Giants and 49ers play in 2011.
Yeah, really interesting matchup here because we have the number 2 team in DVOA playing at the number 7 team in DVOA. Sounds like a toss-up on paper, especially when you consider the lack of Carson Wentz playing in the game. And I think that's exactly. I think this is a pick 'em for me.
I would favor the Vikings slightly. But yeah, home field advantage more than makes up for the difference, I think, between these teams in DVOA, which thus makes the difference in the game, Wentz versus Foles.
And that's a big difference.
It's a big difference. But again, I think we learned last week, not as big as what people thought because of the Oakland game. Everybody overreacted to the Oakland game.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why a lot of the stats that we can pull on Foles are going to be a little bit slanted towards that game. There was also, I forget who the opponent was, the first game that he played this year. He had outstanding stats. So
yes,
the Giants game, right? So trying to split out kind of the Raiders playing a little bit more of the simple, straight up man-to-man stuff. The Giants tend to do a lot of complicated combination type coverages with the Spagnuolo system there. So potentially you see something there stylistically about where Wentz can fit in. One thing that I think separated Carson Wentz really significantly was how he played on third down and under pressure. Wentz was 4th in quarterback rating when under pressure and at 80, whereas Foles is down at 52 quarterback rating, which is 34th in the NFL when under pressure. Clearly, the Vikings do a lot of really good things on defense. They can generate pressure as one of them. It'll be interesting to see if Foles can, A, avoid those situations by staying on schedule a little bit more, and then B, how he performs when they inevitably come. I think the quarterbacks are going to make a lot of the story in this game because we've got 2 great defenses.
Right. Third down is an issue too. So most folks who listen to this podcast will know already that the Vikings had an almost historically legendary third down defense. The Eagles led the league in offensive DVOA on third down, but like all of these splits, well, what does it matter when we talk about the Carson Wentz time? So if we only look since week 14, so including the last 5 games, then the Eagles, I will say, are better than you might think on third down. They are the 13th ranked team on offensive DVOA on third down. And that includes the Raiders game, right? Which kind of dragged things down a little bit. So they're probably more set up than most teams to go after that Vikings third down defense. But the best thing you can do is avoid ever getting to third down in the first place.
Yeah, football is nice. And now in terms of the Vikings defense, what they're going to do is they're going to run a lot of man, and they're going to do it really well. They're the best man coverage team in the NFL. They allowed a rating of just 60 against the course of the season in all of their man coverages, which is just ridiculous. They had 11 interceptions compared to just 6 touchdowns, and they allowed 5.7 yards per attempt. Now, Foles, again, in the small sample size, has struggled more against the man than against other schemes. He's completed just 58% of his passes for 5.7 yards per attempt. So expect the Vikings to come out in man, loading up the box to stop the Eagles' run game, and really daring Nick Foles to beat them by making difficult throws against their tight man defense.
Yeah, and stuffing the box works for the Vikings because they know that when guys get into the secondary, there's going to be good tackling. The Vikings defense third in the league in second level yards per carry. That's yards that come 5 to 10 past the line of scrimmage. Second in the league in open field yards per carry. That's yards that come more than 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. So the Vikings did not allow a lot of long runs this year.
And theoretically, they'd be a team just like you talked about the Patriots' ridiculous splits in terms of being a bend but don't break team. Theoretically, the way the Vikings play their defense, they have a system that's very conducive to making those tackles, living to see another down, and making it very difficult to get into the end zone. Whereas 3 points, okay, we'll give that up every now and then.
Right. So although they were good, they were so good. They don't have the discrepancy between yards per drive and points per drive because they were also so good when it came to yards per drive.
Just an outstanding defense. We talked about some of the run scheme matchups in the other game. In this game, very similarly, I'm looking at when the Eagles have the ball, they've been a better power team this year. They have been better on gap scheme runs than on zone runs this year. They average 5.6 yards per attempt on gap scheme runs, whereas just 3.7 yards per attempt on zone runs. But the Vikings defense has fared well regardless of the scheme. They've been very good against both. So I'd expect the Eagles to come at them with what they do well. I would expect a lot of that power game, a lot of Ajayi and LeGarrette Blount, especially Blount if he can get going early. I think we see them call plays with Ajayi and never really seem totally comfortable with leaving him in there and relying on him. Obviously, you fumble on the first play of the game and it doesn't really help. But he was having a lot of success last week and they got away from him a little bit. It's that power game, though, that I'm looking at where they might be able to just overpower the Vikings up front and, okay, you're loaded up to stop us. Well, we're going to come with what we do well at you anyway. I wouldn't expect, unlike the AFC game, I wouldn't expect a lot of that zone scheme stuff. I don't think they're going to be able to have a lot of success just kind of being straight up with the Vikings.
Yeah, the other side of the ball is much more the strength versus strength because the Eagles finished the year basically tied for fourth in defensive DVOA. But when you look at the weighted ratings, they are currently second. They would theoretically be behind Arizona if, Arizona obviously hasn't played in a couple weeks, but the Philadelphia defense is super strong. I think we saw that last week in the way that they limited the Atlanta offense. But the Minnesota offense is really good too. Minnesota finished the year fifth in DVOA. So this is a real strength against strength matchup. Although I will say the Minnesota running game is not that great. Like it's very average without Dalvin Cook around. Latavius Murray is kind of just a guy. Like he gets the yards that are blocked for him, but he's not a very special running back.
Right. He's not a special running back, and McKinnon's a little bit better in the passing game. The Vikings, in terms of scheme again, they've been better running out of zone than on the pulling scheme runs, but the Eagles actually have the second best run defense on zone schemes this year, under 3 yards per attempt allowed. On the other end of the spectrum, they allow 5.4 yards per attempt with pulling linemen, which puts them at 27th in the league. So if you're the Vikings, you got to test the waters more with more of those gap power concepts. So again, splitting out NFC, think a lot of pulling, a lot of power runs. In the AFC, we're thinking more of that that zone scheme type offense, inside zone, outside zone. And really for both teams in both games, we're seeing those kind of splits.
Right. Now, the Eagles will bring a lot of pressure, just like the Vikings will. And Fletcher Cox is on a lot of people's all-pro teams this year at defensive tackle, and you've got good defensive end. Here's something interesting. I've got the ESPN QBR numbers here. Case Keenum was last in the league in QBR under pressure in 2016. He was number one in QBR under pressure in 2017.
Yeah, it's really crazy. It's second in quarterback rating, just like top in QBR. And fascinating, the Vikings really haven't improved that much in terms of blown blocks from their horrible offensive line of last year. I think it's been Keenum who's made a lot of that difference with kind of what he can do to keep the play alive. Not too different from what we saw from Deshaun Watson in his short run of dominance earlier in the year. The Vikings have the third most plays with blown blocks this year in the NFL. So it's not like they've just been keeping him clean and it's been easy going. He's had to do a lot of stuff under pressure, and it's hard to explain. It really is. Case Keenum's entire career compared to this year, and really especially looking at what he's done against pressure, it's unbelievable.
The improvement in the Minnesota line was much more in run blocking than in pass blocking this year.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. You're on.
I was going to say a couple more things about Case Keenum. The indoor-outdoor splits could be something to keep an eye on. Keenum, obviously not known as a big guy with a lot of arm strength, type of guy that normally plays well outdoors. And the stats have matched it this year. Indoors, his quarterback rating on the season is 105. He's completed over 70% of his passes, 7.9 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns and 2 picks. Meanwhile, when he's been outdoor, which there's been a decent sample size of, the rating drops to 88.7, just 6.6 yards per attempt, 63% completions, and 10 touchdowns to 5 picks. So a big difference there from his indoor-outdoor splits. And I'm curious to see how he performs out in that Philly weather, even though, Mother Nature hasn't been really predictable recently in terms of if it's going to be one of these frigid days or if it's going to warm up suddenly.
I would also look for, on the other side of that, things that are good for the Vikings. The Eagles allowed a lot of yards after catch this season, for example, against wide receivers. So not talking about like screenplays and stuff to running backs here. They allowed 5.2 average yards after the catch. That was third in the league on defense, whereas in Minnesota, you've got those really good receivers, and Minnesota on offense was 11th in the league with an average of 4.2 yards after the catch when wide receivers caught the ball. So they've got to be able to cover Thielen and Diggs, and then they've got to be able to stop Thielen and Diggs after Thielen and Diggs catch the ball.
Yeah, Thielen, the undrafted, Diggs, the 5th rounder, catching the ball from Case Keenum, undrafted. Certainly interesting. I'm expecting the Eagles to.
Yeah, don't miss Diggs. Don't miss Diggs because he'll get yards after catch. I think we've seen that.
Yeah, especially if you duck your head and just completely whiff on him. That certainly makes it a little bit easier. How about that presence of mind to stay in bounds on that play? I couldn't believe it. Even just watching on TV, I'm thinking get out of bounds. Unbelievable.
Right, because you don't see on TV, the TV angle, you couldn't see that there was nobody else behind him. I thought just the defensive call. Teams have got to be better prepared for these situations. How do you have only 2 deep guys?
Right. What?
I mean, have you ever played Madden? Like the default defense when a team tries a Hail Mary is 3 deep guys.
Right. You want to be in 3 deep or 4 deep in that sort. Now, I know they were playing a modified 2 where it's a boundary cover 2 where they're specifically widening out the safeties and not worrying about things in between the hashes. But still, you think just instead of having these 2 guys standing around the middle of the field doing nothing, which they did, they had a couple of underneath guys just kind of standing there. Put an extra guy back there in cover 3 so that you can actually widen those guys out and not have to worry. Or even better, go to cover 4 and really have 2 guys on each boundary taking care of things.
You want 2 guys in the middle of the field because you don't want them to be able to complete a pass in the middle of the field and somehow just go all the way downfield in the middle. But you put those 2 guys farther back so they can get to the sidelines.
Right, so you can make a tackle in this freak situation.
At the line of scrimmage. Because what does a pass to the 50 do for you? What are you going to bring Kai Forbath out to try a 68-yard field goal? That's not a thing you're going to do.
Well, I definitely had some tough memories come back when I saw a stat at the end of the game. They pulled up on the screen that the last time there had been a comeback with, I think, less than a minute left in a playoff game was the Saints that I was a part of in 2011 against San Francisco. Very similar with the Greg Williams defense with the aggressive blitzing call at the end of the game. We let Alex Smith and Vernon Davis beat us in a cover 0 look. This was not cover 0, of course, but still, this was a little bit over aggressive. Now, it's hard to knock the Saints too much. It's especially hard to knock Marcus Williams because he had such a good season and he really stood up and took it on the chin.
And the pick earlier in the game.
He played great, and it's not his fault that this team lost the game. But we have seen this style of defense just be a little bit too aggressive and not knowing when to just take the foot off the pedal a little bit. And I mean, in that sort of a call, a part of it, you just throw your hands up and say, what are you going to do? It's an amazing play. But part of it is, you could have been better prepared there.
Yeah, this seems to always happen to Breeze. Scott Kazmar had the stat. I think it's something like 18 different times Breeze has taken a fourth quarter lead with a comeback, only to see his team give it up with a fourth quarter comeback by the other quarterback.
Yeah, you got to feel for him. One more Case Keenum matchup stat coming into this game. Keenum has not, just like the indoor-outdoor splits, he also hasn't been as good against man as he has against zone this year. So 10 touchdowns, 4 picks, 58% completions, and an 89.7 quarterback rating against man. Meanwhile, he jumps way up to over 70% high yards per attempt against zone. And the Eagles were very good in man this year. They allowed just 51% completions and 6 yards per attempt for a 73 rating. So just like we're expecting the Vikings to man up and try to force Foles to beat him, Philly should man up and try to force Keenum to beat him.
So what are your picks? What do you think? Let's start Jacksonville Patriots. Who are you taking?
As much as I think, like many people, I'd love to see the Jaguars win, I'm going to be hard-pressed to pick Blake Bortles over Brady. I expect the Patriots in this one, although I hope it's closer than the kind of spread would indicate.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, but I would say, and I was talking to Michael David Smith about this on the Twitter, that I think that the Jaguars have a better chance to win this game straight up than you would normally associate with a team that was a 9 or 10 point underdog. In fact, even though the Football Outsiders projected line is somewhat similar to the actual line of 9 points, I think it's really unlikely that this game ends with the Patriots winning by somewhere between 7 and 14 points. I think either the Patriots are going to blow the doors off the Jaguars, or you're going to get a really, really close game with a good chance of the Jaguars winning. I don't see a game where the Patriots just kind of like win by being better, but the Jaguars also play well. Like the Jaguars are either going to show up or they're not.
Yeah, and just like you've said all year, they've been the most volatile team in the league all year, and that certainly plays into it. I'm not a big gambler, but I do have some gambling friends, and of course, the pod is sponsored by MyBookie, where we suggest everybody to put in their off the charts promo code. One thing that's kind of become in vogue lately is that a lot of lines are set where you have a conversion. So I think it's a 9.5 point spread, and it converts to something like an 80% chance of the Patriots winning this week. However, if you incorporate volatility in there, you realize that those numbers really shouldn't be apples to apples. And there's been some people trying to actually play that volatility. And with enough games, if you can create a situation where you're realizing where there's more volatility versus where it should be more of an expected result that'll come down to the point spread, you can play the percentages and actually create a sort of market deficiency there that you can bet on. So interesting food for thought for the gamblers in the crowd.
Minnesota, Philadelphia. Who do you got?
Minnesota, Philadelphia. I think it's a total toss up. I'm really excited for this game. At the end of the day, I'll take the home team. Give me the Eagles.
Yeah, I think I take the Vikings, but it's very close. I think that the Vikings offense is just better than the Philadelphia offense right now, even though both of these defenses are really, really strong. But it is a really close, tight game. And I do think that you mentioned the indoor-outdoor stats. I do think that one of the big question marks here is, what does playing outdoors in the cold mean for Case Keenum? And I don't have a Philadelphia weather report in front of me, but I can tell you that here in Boston, it's not going to be that cold on Saturday or Sunday. It's going to be like 50s for the weekend. So my guess is Philadelphia also is not going to be that cold. So that might actually help the Vikings more than if they had to go to like a 25-degree Philadelphia.
And as I pull up the 10-day forecast for here in Allentown, PA, just about an hour from Philly, we see Sunday 47 and cloudy is with just 7-mile-per-hour wind right now. So should be
It'll
mild.
be a nighttime. It'll be a night game, so the temperature will be lower than that.
Yep, low of
but
36.
It's not going to be freezing.
But it's not a 10-degree game or not a snow game like we saw in that Bills-Jaguars first-round matchup.
Yeah, so I'll take the Vikings, but again, really close. Strong chance of Eagles winning also.
Awesome. All right. Before we sign off, let's give a quick reminder. We won't be potting next week. We'll take the week off as the teams in the NFL has the week off before the Super Bowl, but we'll be back with an early pod the following week so that you have plenty of time to listen to us and get prepared for the Super Bowl matchup. As we sign off, we want to give you a quick reminder to please rate us, promote the show, do whatever you can do, tell your friends. We appreciate all the support you can give, and that includes checking out mybookie.ag and putting in our promo code Off the Charts, where they'll give you a 50% bonus on whatever you deposit. And you can check us out on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS, at FB Outsiders. Have a great weekend of football. Enjoy the championship games.